So, the Shadow and Bone adaptation dropped on Netflix a couple weeks ago. I recently reread the original series, and I also read Six of Crows for the first time, just so I had the entire story fresh in my head going into the show. I was a little apprehensive when I heard they were making this thing. We've gotten so many bad book-to-movie/TV adaptations at this point that I've just learned to lower my expectations when going into them, so finding one that doesn't suck is refreshing. And Shadow and Bone, in fact, does not suck. But the most interesting part about this whole thing is that not only is the show pretty good, but I wholeheartedly believe it's better than the book. I know, crazy, right? I mean, it is a truth universally acknowledged that a book in possession of an adaptation must be better than said adaptation, aka the book is always better than the movie. But Shadow and Bone is an exception, and here's why. In the way that each Six of Crows book is split into 6 parts, I've put together a 6-part argument as to why the Shadow and Bone show is leaps and bounds better than the book. Spoilers ahead for all of these books, so you've been warned. I've got a lot to discuss here and I'm notoriously long-winded, so let's just get into it. Also, let's pretend that I didn't mispronounce like half the terms in this series in my previous videos. Okay, thanks. Shadow and Bone is different from most other YA book adaptations in the sense that it was made into a TV show rather than a movie. As much as there are good book-to-movie adaptations out there, there's also a lot of bad ones out there, like I mentioned. Sometimes they're bad because the budget wasn't there to make it good. Sometimes they're bad because they change so much from the books that the story is basically unrecognizable. And sometimes they're bad because a ton of stuff from the book was cut due to time. And that, I believe, is the kryptonite, or at least one of the kryptonites, of book-to-movie adaptations: time. Fun fact, movies are short. Yes, they're often anywhere from an hour and a half to 2 hours long, but I'm telling you right now that that is short as hell, and sacrifices have to be made during adaptation. Take Half-Blood Prince, for example. While I enjoy this movie, it's no secret that almost all of Voldemort's memories were cut from it, probably because they would have taken up so much time. It's one of my biggest gripes with this movie, and yet I can't even really blame anyone, because how are you supposed to fit 600 pages of story into 150 minutes? You can't. And the Harry Potter movies are already longer than the average film, so in the grand scheme of book-to-movie adaptations, they're pretty alright. And once in a while you get a unicorn like Return of the King or Endgame, where the studio just goes, do whatever you want, and you get a 3 to 4 hour movie. But they are rarities. Usually book-to-movie adaptations don't have the luxury of time. But with TV, knock knock, who's there? Time. A TV adaptation gives us the time to be able to adapt this story properly and not have to cut corners to be able to fit it into 2 hours. Instead, we get to spend around 8 hours with these characters and this world, and be able to explore this story as far as we can. It not only allows us to spend a lot of time with our Shadow and Bone characters, but it also gives us time to have the Crows be a part of this story, which we'll get to later. Now, I'm not saying that just because it's a TV adaptation, it's immediately going to be good, because that's absolutely not the case. I'm just saying that I think choosing to adapt this as a series was a good first step. We have the leeway to be able to tell this story and explore even more from this world that wasn't in the books, that a film wouldn't have been able to do. And that's pretty cool. Alina in the books is a girl who lost her parents in the fold, leading her to grow up in an orphanage called Karamzin with her best friend Mal. We don't know much about her parentage or her past, but we do know that she's written to be fully Ravkan. In the show, Alina is half Ravkan, half Shu, and this was a great decision. A little bit of lore for those who haven't read the books or seen the show and don't really want to but are still watching this for some reason. Alina and most of our main characters are from a country called Ravka, home to the Grisha, people with magic-adjacent abilities who make up the Second Army. Ravka has been at war with its neighboring nations for quite a while, those nations being Firda to the north and Shuhan to the south. While Ravka is Russian-inspired, Firda is based on the Scandinavian region, and Shuhan is based on China and Mongolia. And this sticks with the casting for the show. I think we see 2 Shu characters in the show, the trainer guy whose name I forget, and Alina herself. Ravkans clearly don't like Firdans or the Shu. Making Alina a biracial character gives her more depth and conflict to overcome. Like a minute into the show, we get this lovely line.
I live in East Ravka, but I've never been welcome here because I look like my mother and she looked like the enemy.
Alina in the show feels like even more of an outsider. She's been fighting her entire life to earn the right to simply exist among her peers. She's no less Ravkan than any of them, and yet she's the one who's booted to the back of the line at dinner and the one who should get her eyes changed when she gets to the little palace. Her otherness sets up the second major element to this character, suddenly finding out she's Grisha. Just like she's fought her whole life to be accepted as one of Ravka's own, now she fights to be accepted among the Grisha as one of their own. It's a beautiful little parallel that contributes that much more depth to her. No matter where she is, she has always been out of her element, and that fact makes the moments when she's kicking ass as a Grisha that much more powerful. It says that she does indeed belong among the Grisha, and that when it comes down to it, she will fight for Ravka, because this is her country, no matter what she looks like. It also adds another layer to her relationship with Mal. Throughout the story, Mal is the person she cares about the most. Mal has been one of the only people to truly love her for who she is, with no ulterior motives or conditions or qualms about her. From a very young age, she's bullied for being Shu, and Mal does not care about that. They've loved and protected each other, so of course she would do anything to stay with him for as long as possible, and that includes messing up her own Grisha test, making sure she's on the skiff during the fold, and being with him as he lay dying when Volcra were wreaking havoc instead of saving herself. Her connection with Mal is heightened when you realize that throughout everything, both the hardships she's faced because of the Shu heritage and having her life turned upside down by finding out that she's Grisha, he's the only person she's ever felt she belonged with. It also adds to why she's so drawn to the Darkling, or General Kerrigan. I'm going to be referring to him as either or throughout this, so get used to it. They're the only ones in the world like them, a Darkling and a Sun Summoner, that is. When he tells her the story of how he would come to the fountain and wish he could be anyone else, that speaks to her, since she felt out of place even before learning she was Grisha. It makes Alina like him, because to her, he knows how she feels. Ah, yes. He was a boy escaping a lunatic of an ancestor who's actually him because he's lying about his identity to hide his true evil intentions, and she was a mixed girl. Can I make it any more obvious? And as I've just hinted to, yes, the story about the fountain isn't exactly the truth. That extra level of connection Alina has with Kerrigan makes his betrayal later on in the show that much more harmful. So Alina's half Ravkan, half Shu heritage is a positive to the show character-wise, but also just diversity-wise. In fact, I'm here for the increased diversity in the adaptation as a whole, seeing as I don't think there was as much of it in the book. It's the bare minimum, and we love to see it. Okay, let's talk about my least favorite part of the books, Mr. Malyan Oretsev. If you want to know my official stance on him, it's that he's annoying as hell. Very brief rundown on his story in the books. Mal and Alina grow up together in Karamzin. They go into the fold, Alina discovers she's Grisha and goes to the little palace. She spends months writing to him and he never writes back, so eventually she lets him go, only to find out he's tracking Morozova's stag and that Genya was never sending her letters. He comes to the little palace to accept the assignment. They have a fight because both of them suck. Alina learns the truth about the Darkling and runs away from the palace where she's found by Mal. They track the stag, the Darkling kills it and takes control of Alina, then intends to feed Mal to the Volcra in front of her. Before that can happen, Alina manages to fight them off and uses her light to protect only her and Mal, dooming everyone on that skiff to their deaths. They run away. The next two books are spent with Mal being very whiny and insecure in his position as the love interest, getting jealous at every man who looks her way, and eventually he sacrifices himself for Alina because he's the third amplifier, and then she, brings him back, which I still don't fully understand how that happened, but we won't get into it now. Long story short, he's whiny and annoying. The show adapts most of his story in the first book pretty faithfully, but there's one major difference that makes everything better, and it's that we actually spend time with Mal. Yeah, it's as simple as that. The book is written in a first-person closed perspective, which means we're in Alina's head 100% of the time. If she's not physically present for something, we don't see it, which means that Mal isn't present in a large chunk of the book. He's absent for most of the second act, so when he does reappear, it feels strange and unearned, as does their romance. In the show, however, the point of view is omniscient, which allows us to see different characters without Alina being there. This means we spend a lot more time with Mal and get to actually experience his side of the story, his emotions, and his desire to get to Alina rather than him just telling us about it after he reunites with her. We get to see him writing letters and waiting for responses that never come. We see the lengths he goes to track the stag, and we see him and his friends being attacked in Firda. We witness his friends' deaths and his own near demise. By the way, making his friends objectively sweet, lovable, and harmless is also a great decision because we get really healthy male relationships for Mal to have, and you definitely feel like they didn't deserve the fate they got, just because they were good friends and loyal to Mal. The show allowed us to follow Mal and root for him as a character, rather than tossing him aside for 3/4 of an act, then jarringly shoving him back in as the book did. Getting to spend time with Mal also shows us firsthand his agency as a character, running after Alina's carriage, volunteering to track Morozova's stag, insisting that he go to the little palace even though he was badly hurt. It's all great. Some of my favorite moments with him, however, come when he's facing Kerrigan. When Mal arrives at the little palace with the location of Morozova's stag, he lets Kerrigan know its general location, but when Kerrigan asks him to give him specifics, Mal refuses to do so until he sees Alina. And I really like this. This one scene gives him more agency than I think most of the first book did. Here Mal is, facing the most powerful Grisha known to man, and he won't give him what he wants until he gets what he wants. Could it have been a bad idea? Yeah. Is it more than a little bit stupid? Hell yeah. But it shows us who Mal is as a person. He loves Alina, and he's willing to lay down his life for the people he loves. Their second scene comes after the Darkling has captured both Alina and Mal. Essentially, the Darkling tells Mal that he won't kill him because Alina is going to stay young while Mal ages and dies.
I'm not going to kill you. I don't need to. Time will do it for me.
Which obviously Mal can't do anything about since he's chained up and the Darkling is, you know, the Darkling. But he does get his comeuppance during the climax when he and Mal just fight. And it's fun, it's exciting, and it gives Mal this fantastic moment.
Did you really think you could kill me?
I don't have to kill you, Darkling. Your past will do it for me.
Yeah, I think in some world somewhere, Mal and the Darkling fall for each other. Hang on, are there fanfics about that? Surprisingly, no. I feel like there's a market to be filled here. Speaking of shipping Mal with people, let's talk about Malina. Like I said, Mal is not nearly as annoying in the show as I found him to be in the books. Granted, this is only the first part of the story, so there's plenty of room for him to become annoying, but if this first season is any indicator for how things will go, I think he's gonna be less annoying. Don't get me wrong, Mal's main motivation in the show is the same as it is in the books, Alina, but he's a lot less insecure and more reasonable. He doesn't necessarily care about what Alina and Kirigan may have done together because it's not his place, and show Mal understands that. They're also in kind of a difficult situation, so as much as we, the audience, know they have feelings for each other, for them, jumping into a relationship as soon as they reunite is not the priority, and I prefer it this way. It makes me kinda ship them. It makes logical sense that they wouldn't dive into their relationship right away, especially seeing as Alina has just been betrayed by the Darkling, so it's nice to leave the possibility of Malina up in the air to explore later. Overall, Mal in the show is 1,000 times better than he is in the book. He's a lot more tolerable, and even someone to root for. Congrats, Mal! You gave us something! The first 15 minutes of episode 7 develop the Darkling more than the entirety of the 3 books combined. A lot of this is new information, stuff we never see in the books. This is what I was talking about in my video where I reread these books. We're meant to sympathize with the Darkling at the end to a certain extent, but the book didn't get there for me. I might actually be able to get there with the show, however, if the next seasons continue in this way, and that's because we know so much more about the Darkling. Episode 7 shows us who he really is. He didn't start off as an inherently evil dude with dreams of world domination. He started off as a hunted man from a class of hunted people. He started off as a person trying to help his own, to make the world a safer place for Grisha by giving them the power they need. Not only that, but he's a man who, in trying to help the Grisha by giving them an army, ends up wiping out those he was meant to protect by creating the Fold. But after seeing what the Fold can do, this is the first time he thinks they could actually have some power. It's this that encourages the Darkling to train his Grisha to fight, hence creating the Second Army. But it's over the years as the Darkling has continued existing, both powerful and lonely, not to mention angry at the First Army, the King, and Utgatsatsya, or normal people without powers as a whole, that his idea of safety for the Grisha becomes more intense. For him, safety for the Grisha and Ravka as a whole means power, hence using the Fold as a weapon to show people how powerful they are and end all wars with Ravka. That is great. Am I super happy about the Frigid Woman? No. Seriously, we need to find a different way to develop male characters that don't involve killing off female characters. Thank you very much. But other than that, I think this is pretty good. Like I said, it's much more than we get in the books, and it makes it easier to understand where the Darkling is coming from. We also get to see a different side of him, a side that doesn't have all the answers just yet, a side that genuinely cares for others, both his partner and his mother. In fact, it's his mother who suggests he run, change his name, lay low for a century or two, and return with the nobleman's name when the king genuinely needs him, which we know he does, seeing as he's faked multiple deaths throughout the centuries so people don't know he's the Black Heretic, and he goes by the name Kirigan in this rather than the Darkling. And I think these touches to his character make him easier to see as a real person, which the books tried to achieve but didn't quite do. One of the scenes I really enjoyed was this one between Alina and the Darkling right before they head into the Fold in episode 8. We get a lot more from this than we do from the book, or at least it feels more realistic. He cares about her because he feels he's found someone like him, but instead of asking her to join him, he takes the power for himself.
I could have made Grisha safe, but you never gave me a choice.
And he looks genuinely hurt here. He clearly has feelings for her that go deeper than surface level romance. There is no one else in the world like them, which is what draws him to her and her to him. I think it's done really well, and even if you haven't read the books, you can tell there's more there. We can hopefully see the beginning of exploring the great loneliness of the Darkling in future seasons. Also, the final scene of this season is just awesome. I mean, look at the Nichevoya. The Shadow Army looks great. It's a haunting scene, seeing him come out of the Fold even after we saw him get mauled by the Volcra like a rag doll, and then seeing the Nichevoya following him out? Come on, it's just badass, and I couldn't think of a better way to end the first season. And now, let's talk about the reason I was most excited for the show. Let's be honest, the inclusion of the crows in this story is fan service. It is 100% pure, in-your-face, sweet, spicy, sexy fan service. And yet, it works, because it's not just fan service for the sake of being fan service. Their inclusion in the story actually makes sense, and is probably the thing that makes this show as fun as it is. The crows are one of the best parts of this entire story, and they're definitely the most fun part, like I just said. Most of their scenes have a different tone than the rest of the show. They're a lot more snazzy and stylish, and they have an infectious rhythm that gets your heart beating. It's honestly a perfect embodiment of who they are. They're not the stuffy, elitist Grisha, or the anxious nervousness of Alina and Mal, or the intimidating, something might not be entirely right here air of Kirigan. They are their own thing. They're badass and dramatic, and more than a little bit head-ass while still being incredibly intelligent and competent. They also bring a lot of humor and heart to the show, which is doubly endearing since you know they're hardened criminals. It also doesn't hurt that Freddie Carter, Amita Suhan, and Kit Young have genuinely great chemistry together. I think the most I've laughed at the show was at the crows. There's a reason there are so many people making compilations of the crows being chaotic, because they are. You'd think that the shifts in tone would be a detriment, but actually I think they work. The crows feel like the walking embodiments of Ketterdam, more specifically the barrel. The barrel is dirty, crime-stricken, and not for the faint of heart, exactly like our crows. And the shifts are even stronger when you contrast them with the uppity, put-together nature of the little palace. But enough about their vibes, let's talk about their plot. I'm gonna be honest, I don't think this first book, Shadow and Bone, is the strongest. There's a lot of dead, wasted time, people just sitting around and trying to get Alina's powers to work, and also tracking the stag. Goddamn, they spend so much time tracking that stag. Anyway, in my opinion, it's not the best. So, how do you fix that? Enter the crows. They beef up this story and make it 10 times more interesting, and it makes complete sense too. They would have lived through the events of the Shadow and Bone series, and since everyone is out to get Alina, it wouldn't be a surprise if the news made its way to Ketterdam and Kaz wanted in too. A dangerous job involving the kidnap of a supposed saint that would leave them with 1,000,000 Kruger? Yes, sir! It makes for some really fun moments with them.
They're kept under lock and key, far from the prying eyes of the masses.
Yes. What does that mean? Oh, time for a heist.
The excitement I got at that line, because this is what we know the crows for. And yes, though none of their plans are as convoluted and impressive as what we see in Six of Crows, they're still a lot of fun, and it's a little taste of what possibly is to come if the showrunners ever want to take 2 whole seasons to adapt Six of Crows and Crooked Kingdom. Oh my goodness, please do that. I would pay so much money to see that. So the inclusion of our main crows, Kaz, Inej, and Jesper, makes the main story bigger and adds another layer of conflict. But we also get some prequel character development from our main 3. Jesper clearly already has a gambling problem, which we can assume will only get worse in the future. We also know how talented he is as a sharpshooter, and we've established that he's a bicon. We haven't really gotten any hints as to him being a fabricator other than his talent at shooting, but I don't think that really counts because that's just a character thing, and he never considers the possibility that he's such a good shooter because he can control the bullets until much, much later. I think the closest thing we get to a hint is when Inej says this.
Jesper fixed your cane.
Which I liked, because it's not something that's going to catch the attention of solely show viewers, but it's a little thing to get excited about to book readers. Our queen Inej is just so great. I love that we get to see both her badass side, kicking ass and taking no prisoners, but also her vulnerable side. At this point in her life, she still works at the menagerie for Tantaline, which is obviously traumatic. She also feels more indebted to Kaz as he's currently in the process of paying off her indenture, which is also why I love watching her clash with Kaz. After watching Alina do her light show thing, Inej is fully convinced she's a saint and will not help Kaz and Jesper kidnap her. This disagreement develops the dynamic between Kaz and Inej, and shows Inej is strong enough to make a stand for herself. In fact, she's one of the only characters in the show, and books as well, to actually stand up to Kaz. This also shows how integral she is to them, because they genuinely can't go after Alina without her. I also love the development we get with Inej's relationship with taking lives. When we meet Inej in Six of Crows, she's an experienced spy and assassin who's already taken too many lives to count. But years earlier in this show, she still hasn't made that ultimate move and is actually afraid to. Throughout the show, we can see her coming out of this mindset. The first person she kills, she does so as a split-second decision in order to save Kaz's life, and she's horrified by it. The second person she considers letting live, but after they threaten to kill her family and friends and then her, she decides, yeah, maybe it's better to just kill them. And the third time comes during the climax on the skiff, when she straight up throws a knife at the darkling with the intention of killing him. No hesitation, no qualms, she just does it. Queen. Of course it doesn't work because Ben Barnes doesn't die, or age for that matter like the rest of us plebs, but it's the thought that counts. Alright, let's talk about the man himself, Kaz Brekker. I think he's characterized a little differently in the show. He seems a bit softer, and sometimes it's a bit weird, like in the first episode when he's overpowered by Pekka's men in like 3 seconds. I was like, excuse me? This is Kaz Brekker, the guy who fought like 7 dudes all at once to regain control of his gang. So that was off-putting, but I don't really mind the rest. It's a little jarring since I just came off of Six of Crows and Crooked Kingdom, but I think it's fine, especially when you realize this takes place a whole 2 years before the events of Six of Crows, so he's still on his way up. up. He'll develop more in those 2 years into the true dirty hands, bastard of the barrel we know him as in Six of Crows. And if he doesn't, if this is just the version of the character we get in the show, I'm not entirely opposed to that. I love book Kaz, but giving him more of a visible soft side might be better for the show since we can't be directly in his head like in the book. Kaz is the character we probably know the least about in terms of backstory. I was surprised they didn't delve too deep into it. The most we get is that Kaz has an obsession with getting vengeance on Pekka Rollins. It's the big reason why he was interested in this kidnapping the Sun Summoner job in the first place. I'm assuming they're keeping the bulk of his backstory for later, aka getting swindled, brother dying, waking up surrounded by dead bodies, having to swim to shore by using his brother's day-old dead body as a flotation device, and subsequently having lifelong trauma when it comes to people touching him skin on skin. But whenever they do decide to get around to it, I'm excited. I like the scene in the first episode where Kaz takes his gloves off in front of Inej. It sets up that he wears those gloves, and even though show viewers wouldn't know that he only takes them off in front of Inej, book readers do, and it's fun. It's cute. It's like a little lovey-dovey date night. Anyway, I'll come back to Kaz's backstory later. Nina and Matthias. Their backstory was adapted in this season, and I think that was a good idea. In Six of Crows, their backstory is told through flashbacks as the bulk of it happened in the past, so I liked that they told that story in real time with this season. I'm interested to see what's going to happen with them in the next season. We can guess that Nina's going to start working with the Crows, but for Matthias, I think it's a little more up in the air. From here, Matthias gets locked up in Hellgate for 2 years before Kaz breaks him out in Six of Crows. Anyway, not much more to say about them right now. Wylan Van Eck is not in this show. He's the only crow we don't see, and once again, this makes a lot of sense. At this point in his life, Wylan would still be living with his father, trying to win his approval. He doesn't really have a logical reason for being in this story, so the writers didn't include him, which I respect. The most we get is Jesper saying this.
I mean, we need a demo man.
It's still on that.
Hinting that maybe one day we'll get our merchling. Okay, I feel like at some point during this I just started yelling about why I love the Crows and I completely forgot my thesis, so let's go back to it. Crows good, so show good. They're a cool B-plot, making the story that much more fun while not drastically changing the original A-plot. But as much as I enjoy the Crows, I do have to admit that while their inclusion makes the show a lot more fun, it isn't perfect. There's stuff about the Crows that I think could have been done better. For one thing, sometimes their story feels kind of separate from the main story, and I think this is because the writers were trying to make sure they didn't change the A-plot too much from the original Shadow and Bone book. So it makes for a kind of weird thing where they set out to accomplish something and then they don't accomplish much, and I think this could have been fixed had the writers let them shake up the main story a little more. For example, when they infiltrate the little palace to kidnap Alina, they fail and would have left without her. It's pure coincidence that Alina happens to get into a trunk in the back of the carriage that Jesper secured for their escape. While I had my issues with this, I was ready to let it slide because I was super excited at the prospect of what was going to happen next with them. I thought it was a great setup for some really fun shenanigans later. But then it's like, not. They have a little confrontation and then Alina attacks Kaz and Jesper and Inej lets her go because she's Sancta Alina. And I know they continue looking for her and the Darkling confronts them to find out her whereabouts, but I just wish we'd gotten a little more. Like, imagine if Alina had stuck around with them for a while, if they'd actually kidnapped her. They could get up to some hijinks, maybe learn more about her and her about them, and have more conflict. Kaz could understand just how powerful she is and realize he could ask for a much higher price for her, like tens of millions of Kruga higher, which would make him even more adamant to get her back to Ketterdam. Then she could escape, or Inej could set her free, which would lead to more conflict between her and Kaz, and she could run into the woods where Mal would find her. Obviously, Kaz would be furious, and his efforts to get her again would be doubled. Throw in the Darkling looking for her, and the story is back on track. And just for kicks and giggles, since the Darkling knows the Crows were responsible for her disappearance, put a bounty on their heads or something, I don't know. So now, not only do the Crows want Alina because she's hella powerful and could get them a ton of Kruga, but they're also Ravka's most wanted. All of that could encourage them to be on that skiff at the climax, and from there, things could stay relatively the same. Kaz, as much as he wants Alina, realizes how royally screwed they are in the fold and makes them hide out below deck until it's safe to grab her. They find Mal, Inej goes up to help them fight, Jesper follows, Kaz soon after, because, you know, if his Crows are going to be idiots and risk their lives, the least he could do is be there to save them. They get out of the fold, Alina buys Kaz's silence with her jewelry, and they all get on a ship to go their separate ways. The jewelry will pay off the rest of Inej's indenture and get the Crow Club back, and they have to figure out what to do about Dreesen when they come back empty-handed. But maybe we could have also thrown in how Kaz still has his sights set on the Sun Summoner, at least a little bit, cause think about how easily you could tear Pekka Rollins down brick by brick with that much Kruga. I don't know, that's just a split-second idea, it's not the most amazing, but I think it ties the Crows into the main story a bit better. You definitely feel the separation when it comes to Nina and Matthias, seeing as they have no impact on the A-plot. I think another thing that could have been done better with the Crows is Kaz's backstory, or lack thereof. I think we needed to learn a little more about him to be able to sympathize with him more, especially for people who haven't read the book. So, yeah, I don't know how to end this. The Crows aren't perfect, but in my opinion, they still make the show better because without them, it would just be everyone sitting around waiting for Alina to improve her powers and tracking that goddamn stag. I have more stuff to say, but I don't really know where else to talk about it, so here it is. Politics! I love them in my fantasy stories because they offer another layer of conflict and make the world feel more realistic and lived in. The politics specific to Shadow and Bone do just that, and as far as I can remember, they were absent in the book. The gist of the main political issue in the show is how West Ravka wishes to separate from East Ravka and become a sovereign nation, and this is a 100% logical train of thought. If the Fold has been cutting the country in two for as long as it has, it makes sense that at some point, West Ravka, which has essentially been left to its own devices for so long, would want to become a sovereign nation and rule themselves. You can imagine that in those centuries that they've been so separated from East Ravka, they probably would have developed their own culture and way of life, or at least it would have evolved into something different than East Ravka's. The issue of sovereignty is a cool idea, especially since its inclusion means that there's one more person after Alina. General Zlatsov, the leader of the separatist movement, is one of the only people who would benefit from the Fold, so of course he would want Alina dead. I wish he had a slightly bigger role just to further cement the political unrest, and to make it even more of a slap to the face when the darkling straight up annihilates Novokribursk. Like, oh, you want to be a sovereign nation? How about you're not a nation at all? But other than that, I liked the inclusion. Some of the imagery was really cool, particularly the imagery of Morozova's collar and its counterpart for the darkling. In the book, Morozova's collar sits around Alina's neck, like, well, a collar. The show took it a step further and literally melds the bone into her skin, into her neck, and the counterpart into the darkling's hand. It's definitely a gruesome, disturbing, and haunting image, and it works better for a visual format. And this way, it's even more in your face that she can't take the collar off. In the book, she can't take it off because it's fused together around her neck with no clasps, no hinges. But in the show, it's literally in her, which drives home how much she is the collar now, and how much control the darkling truly has over her. Yeah, it's dark, it's gruesome, I like it a lot. And of course Milo. Throw a goat into any story and it'll be 10 times better for it. Overall, I liked Shadow and Bone. It's fun for what it is, and I think it did a pretty good job of taking the story from the books and translating it for the screen, so much so that I think this version of it is better than the original. Is it a perfect show? No. But is it entertaining? Hell yeah. It's satisfying for book fans and a good introduction into this world for everyone else. That being said, if Milo isn't in season 2, I'm suing.